Log on to patreon.com/Dane Calloway or paypal.me/Dane Calloway to support me, my channel, and my content. By demand, merchandise is now available at I'mJustHereToMakeYouThink.com.
I knew nothing about the American Indian, and that everything we are taught about the American Indian is wrong. It's inaccurate. And our school books are hopelessly lacking, perhaps criminally lacking, in revealing what our relationship was with the Indian.
I'm tired. I'm really tired of the manipulation.
Also, what we've learned about the Indians has been largely taught to us by Hollywood and by motion pictures. They have educated us. Indians have been tragically misrepresented in films and in our history books, in our attitudes, in our reporting. So we must set about to re-educate ourselves. 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 So we must set about to re-educate ourselves.
They manipulate our history books. The history books are not true. It's a lie.
That's right, Michael.
The history books are lying.
The history books are lying.
You need to know that. You must know that.
When third world countries are misrepresented, they're likely to be valued less. When Mercator maps exaggerate the importance of Western civilization, when the top of the map is given to the Northern Hemisphere, and the bottom is given to the Southern, then people will tend to adopt top and bottom attitudes.
When we hear, as we've heard throughout all our lives, no matter how old we are, that we are a country that stands for freedom, for rightness, for justice, for everyone. It simply doesn't apply to those who are not white. It just simply doesn't apply. And we were the most rapacious, aggressive, destructive, torturing, monstrous people who swept from one coast to the other, murdering and causing mayhem among the Indians. When we say, especially, that we are going to keep our treaties, and that we do keep our word, and that we, above all people, do keep our word. I think it's important to mention that there have been nearly 400 treaties written by the United States in good faith with the Indians, and every single one of them was abrogated. It means broken or changed or altered altogether.
Okay, everyone. Now, in this particular segment, I will be covering many details that is, of course, very essential to all Americans, and especially to those who are the direct descendants of the indigenous Aboriginal Niji of this land, now called North America. And before I go any further, allow me to acknowledge that I do totally understand that many of you may have heard either very little to no detail at all concerning this information that I'm about to present to you, merely due to the fact that you were lied to, like millions of others, no matter if they share the same hue of complexion with you or not. In many of my previous documentaries, I've shared various detailed information that was hidden to the public as to why multiple different things were purposely told to you in reverse, which leads me to my very first point of this segment. And that is, why was history told to you in reverse? Now, this question alone will be continuously answered throughout this particular segment and also throughout nearly all of my content that I present to the public. Reason being is due to how history is depicted in today's society of America, because history today is now known as what is documented from the past But the problem resides in what was considered to be history in the past, simply because history in the past was literally what a sole individual made it to be. Now, this generation of people would inadvertently believe that that's how history should be, and I agree with you. However, I would add that generational past history differs from, say, for example, like LeBron James making history in one of his past championship games. Why? Well, merely due to how generational past history is formatted, in which it would teach generations of people a fictitious story of unforeseen information, a one-directional, or rather one-sided story told by a particular group of people in order to establish and maintain a deceitful hidden agenda of propaganda that will manipulate its readers or listeners into a system of theology indoctrination. In other words, these particular individuals that provided this information told you what they wanted to tell you, no matter if it was based on any truths, facts, or their own opinions. It is called the illusion of power, whereas this illusion is that one group of people are somehow superior to others. What is also important to note here is that there are multiple different entities that are man-made, and history is one of them, along with various types of science, technology, and even many forms of religion. All of these social engineering experiments were cultivated by the same exact one set group of people that I mentioned earlier in order to compel the masses into adopting it. The ideology alone of their manipulative theoretical motives programs an individual to become prone with limits to their literacy and critical thinking capabilities. Not only were these same tactics utilized in the past, but these detrimental effects are currently being depicted as the norm in today's society. This form of role reversal began with Charles Darwin and his followers when they began to promote and teach the theory of evolution during the 1800s. As you may know, the theory of evolution is a scientific method in which Charles Darwin states the process of natural selection and pseudoscientific blatantly racist information that he cultivated in relation to the world's population. Now, why would he do this? Well, it's definitely not about whether man came from monkeys, as society would love to point to you, so you can argue about this fictitious theory whenever it's brought up. No, it's more about the different traits of the human population, how different traits confer different rates of survival and reproduction, and also how these traits can be passed down from generation to generation. Now, you might be asking, so what does this have to do with our history being told to us in reverse? And my answer to that is everything. Because Charles Darwin created this theory of evolution not because of the apes, but because he was a part of it. In other words, Charles Darwin's pseudoscientific theory was used to manipulate people into believing that they evolved from apes, but in all actuality, he was endeavoring to figure out where his species of people came from. This module will go on to formulate how this particular group of collective offspring will be able to continue forward in successive generations as the quote, survival of the fittest. See, you have to understand where Europe is located. Before it was called Europe, that particular landmass was, and still is, a part of Africa. And all of this correlates with some of the many things that were told to you in reverse. Like, for example, the out of Africa theory. Now, keep in mind that I just explained to you the hidden details behind Charles Darwin's theory. And just like his theory of evolution, the entire out of Africa theory is merely nothing but an indoctrinated form of manipulative pseudo-storytelling that was cultivated by the likes of a self-proclaimed prominent but yet fictitious bigoted scientist named Melville Jean Herskovits. an anthropologist of the early 1900s. Melville is solely responsible for expanding the lies of storytelling, in which in turn it was later considered to be American history, by completely reversing the records of historic information and also creating a fictional story about African slaves immigrating to the Americas by way of the Spaniards during the 1500s. This story was later known as the Middle Passage. However, prior to Melville's fictional story, no information existed in history that clearly mentioned that the so-called Negroes of the American lands came from Africa. For example, according to an English immigrant by the name of Noah Webster, who is the author of the Webster's English Language Dictionaries, the year 1828's definition of American is, quote, a native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals, or copper-colored races, found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. Also, Melville allegedly took a trip to somewhere in Africa, meaning that there is absolutely no records of this, just the story, gathered up a few artifacts from there, observed a few tribes and a few cultures, and dubbed it as Africanism, then traveled back to the US, wrote a book called The Myth of the Negro Past, and published it in 1942 in the fictional section, where he claimed that the people of color in America somehow lost connection with their cultural past during the Middle Passage from Africa to the Americas. See, the people like Melville and the US government, along with the US public school system, wants you to believe that the lands of America were unoccupied prior to their arrivals. But the truth is that they were occupied by our ancestors, and not these people that they are referring to as Native Americans right now. Our ancestors were not of pale skin, but only dark to light brown skin complexions. The out of Africa theory, along with these fraudulent DNA tests from the 1900s, works hand in hand for one big reason. Because they were created by the same group of people that forced you to believe that you came from Africa, when in fact, millions of these Caucasians did not arrive to North America until the late 1700s. Hence the reason why the US Census did not begin the population count until the year 1790. And all of those records between the 1790 US Census and the 1830 Census were either lost or destroyed somehow. Side note, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 gave government officials the permission to destroy those records to further hide the truth about who the real African Americans are, furthering the expansion of eugenics by manipulating millions of people into believing a lie. Another example of history that was told to you in reverse is that of the world maps. Over the years, several different maps were created, the majority of them to reflect imperialism and to exacerbate the size and importance of the ruling countries.
The Mercator projection has fostered European imperialist attitudes for centuries and created an ethnic bias against the Third World.
All world maps in today's history derived from the European traditional Mercator world map of 1569, and all of these maps are royally incorrect.
The map enlarges areas at the poles to create straight lines of constant bearing or geographic direction.
So it makes it easier to cross an ocean.
But
Yes.
it distorts the relative size of nations and continents.
Are you saying the map is wrong?
Oh dear, yes.
They are in fact flipped upside down and shown to you in reverse, with the current hemispheres misrepresented, meaning that it distorts the size of objects, or rather continents, and also misplaces the location of a continent's position on purpose.
Here we have Europe, drawn considerably larger than South America. When it's 6.9 million square miles, South America is almost double the size of Europe's 3.8 million.
Alaska appears 3 times as large as Mexico, and Mexico is larger by 0.1 million square miles.
Germany appears in the middle of the map when it's in the northernmost quarter of the Earth.
Wait. Relative size is one thing, but you're telling me that Germany isn't where we think it is?
Nothing is where you think it is.
Where is it?
I'm glad you asked.
This was done this way to give off the impression that the Western Europeans are superior to other races of people by being above the New World, or rather third world countries.
Salvatore Natoli of the National Council for Social Studies argues, in our society, we unconsciously equate size with importance and even power. In our society, we unconsciously equate size with importance and even power.
When third world countries are misrepresented, they're likely to be valued less. When Mercator maps exaggerate the importance of Western civilization, when the top of the map is given to the Northern Hemisphere and the bottom is given to the Southern, then people will tend to adopt top and bottom attitudes.
But wait, where else could you put the Northern Hemisphere but on the top?
On the bottom.
How?
Like this.
This misrepresentation of history and the many ways that it has been reversed has definitely affected our people's mentality, nationality, cultures, heritage, history, and even education. So, there's no coincidence that this same one-set group of racist people in America wants you to go back to Africa, all while consistently pushing the fictitious agenda into your conscious that Africa is where they immigrated your ancestors from. Because the truth is that they will want your attention on a different area of landmass for a bigger reason. And that reason is so you won't notice that America is truthfully your direct ancestors' mainland, and Africa is actually where their ancestors originally derived from, making them the real African Americans, due to the story being purposely told to you in reverse. I'm just here to make you think.